How are we doing, Caitlin?
Thank you for your patience, Mr. Chair. I can confirm that the Ottawa City Council YouTube stream has been restarted successfully, and also that we did remain live on ottawa.ca on our e-agenda page. So you may continue the Planning Committee meeting whenever you have quorum.
Okay, so once I see 6 committee member video screens up, we're at 4 so far. We're at 5. One more and we can go back to Councillor Leeper. If we do have any more committee members at their desks, we need one more on screen before we can continue. And we have 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, good. We can continue. Councillor Leeper, we had left off on your question, so you can continue.
Yeah, I think I'd posed most of it. I just was wondering, Councillor Fleury referred to sort of a backdoor approvals process. And I'm just trying to figure out what that is, because it looks like they're doing renovations to the existing building without making any major modifications to footprint or height or the structure or anything under building permit. And then, you know, they're being very transparent with building the second building here. So if there's a process issue that councillors should be aware of, I'm looking for some clarification on that.
From the councillor or from staff?
From the councillor.
Okay.
Yeah, just a little bit of color.
Sure, no, glad to give you the context, and I'm certainly not insinuating that they're not following building permits. I'm saying I've heard from their planning consultants and I've heard from planning staff that by the fact they go into a building, getting a building permit, doing work there, and then they come with additions. These are one of multiple sites that are happening currently in Sandy Hill from this owners group. There are a lot of things that we can discuss, including garbage and doors, that is then shut down because they've invested new dollars into an older building. And I would note to you that these buildings really live separately, as they've mentioned. Yet if they live separately, they should have a separate municipal address with the proper setbacks between the properties. So feels like, you know, if they came in through pre-consult, shared the full plan, look at all the options, including on all these measures, there could be better options presented. Certainly not against the, and I'm not even speaking about the number of bedrooms or the unit, but the impacts of the approach they take creates these loopholes, which, you know, we have garbage pressures in Sandy Hill. At that site, there's a lot of garbage pressures already. And what they're proposing is, again, the same impacts on city enforcement and management. that's by design. That's by the way they follow, by the way they're doing their process. So it feels like a bit of a loophole.
Okay, let's chat more about that. I'm there in front of us with an addition that is subject to site plan, presumably, which seems like it's all above board, but we can chat more. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Leeper. I think I understand what Councillor Fleury is trying to raise and achieve with this motion. I want to ask staff if this is actually something we can legally do through the amendment to the document that Councillor Fleury is proposing in the motion. Can someone from staff comment on?
The city can provide, Mr. Chair, in a zoning bylaw that the waste storage is to be internal to the primary building. That is a matter that, as a legal technical matter, can be included in a zoning bylaw. Whether it's appropriate from on a planning basis is, of course, for planners to provide their opinion on.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? Okay, so, well, on Councillor Fleury's motion regarding revising document 2, is that motion carried?
So the effect of passing that would be to force them to include the garbage internally?
Essentially, yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeas and nays, please.
Okay, yeas and nays?
Councillor Brockington? Councillor Klitschak?
We.
Councillor Curry?
Yes.
Councillor Dudas?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley?
Yes.
Councillor Kitts?
No.
Councillor Leeper?
No?
Councillor Menard? Councillor Tierney? Councillor El-Shantiri?
Yes.
Chair Moffat? Chair Gower?
Yes.
6 yeas, 2 nays.
Okay, and then on the report as amended, is the report, are the report recommendations carried?
Right.
Carried. Okay. Thank you. I believe we're moving on to our last held item, which is 5.13, Community Benefits Charge Strategy and Bylaw. Councillor Fleury has a couple of motions. Let's introduce those first before we go with anything else.
Only one, Mr. Chair.
Just one? Okay.
Yeah.
If you have it ready, you could start, Councillor, and we're just getting it up on screen.
I really want to thank staff. I've been informed and educated through the process, and Charmaine and Ranbir and the team's been very helpful. I'd worked under the same provisions that we all had to develop a list under 5 themes, none of which were, none of the items that were raised were costed, which creates the issue that although meeting the themes, they're not costed, so you can't add them to the list. Although the list means nothing, I'm just doing the next step, which is making sure items are costed, and then it will be up to next council to decide if they're appropriate CBC elements when the reports comes back. I believe it's ahead of the next budget, although those aren't really budget items, they're really related to development.
Okay. Do you have it in front of you, Councillor? Do you want to read the therefore be it resolved? Otherwise, I can read it for you.
I'm not behind my desk, Chair, so the screen is too small for me to read. I apologize.
I'll read your therefore be it resolved. Therefore be it resolved with respect to the report that Planning Committee recommends Council direct staff work with the Ward 12 Council to review and provide cost estimates for Ward 12's list of projects for inclusion on the Community Benefits Charge capital project list as part of the next capital program list review prior of the next budget cycle. And since Chair Moffat isn't in his seat, I can move on your behalf. Okay, we have delegations. We also have staff available for presentation. I know many committee members have seen a presentation on this previously. Do committee members want to see a presentation as part of this planning committee? Yes or no? I see a no. I'm thinking no. Okay, we will skip the staff presentation, but thank you, staff, for being ready to do that. And we'll go to our delegations. We have two delegations, Miranda Gray and Jason Burgraff. Is Miranda with us? Because she is listed first.
Bear with me for a moment, Chair.
It's been a long afternoon for our delegations to wait.
Yeah, I don't see her on the call at the moment.
Okay, do we have Jason on the call?
Yep, he's there.
Okay, well, let's go ahead with Jason, and if Miranda joins us the next few moments, we can come back to her. Hi, Jason. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try to keep my comments a bit short. In reality, there's been an important thread of conversation at Planning Committee over the past number of months, and you've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again, about the cumulative impact of city-imposed costs on new housing. And as we discuss through inclusionary zoning, through Bill 109, through discussion of the comprehensive zoning bylaw, parkland dedication, the high performance development standard, and now here at community benefits charges, additional city-imposed costs on housing are negatively impacting housing affordability and supply. They're disincentivizing intensification, especially when it comes to mid and high density housing around transit. The community benefit charge in particular is actively working against the city's housing affordability and intensification goals, as it's a charge on a certain type of high density unit required for the growth management study, but it's also been set up as basically a DC surcharge on intensification units. And these units are supposed to be encouraged and most desirable according to the draft official plan. Again, the vast majority of the cost burden of the CBC is going on the type of housing that's supposed to be the most affordable in the city going forward, your 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartments that are close to transit. And so, I mean, we've talked about the cumulative impacts a lot. I did want to bring up 3 specific things about the CBC that we feel like councillors should be aware of in terms of its benefit and its effectiveness. These are also outlined in our written submission. First, the growth funding tool, the vast majority of the cost is actually going to go on taxpayers. In order to pay for the list of projects that you have within the strategy, it calls for a 70 million contribution on CBC charges, but 338 million on new rate taxpayer money. That's your benefit to existing and replacement, a column on table 7 of the strategy. So the vast majority of the spending here is just on taxpayers in general. The actual projection of actual revenue on the charge matches the annual revenue seen under Section 37 agreements. So you're on again, in the strategy and in the staff report, they comment that you're getting about the same amount of money that you did under Section 37. You're not anticipated to get more money than that. So when you see that $70 million versus $35 million of revenue that we've seen previously, don't think that by enacting the CBC, we're magically going to get a higher number. The other thing I really wanted to point out, and Councillor Fleury's motion kind of speaks to this a little, is that as we've been advised by staff, the project list is really illustrative. I don't think, again, if you're implementing the CBC, that you're going to get all these wonderful things on this list. It's not necessarily, any of these items are not necessarily going to come through. Certainly not all of them are going to come through. They're certainly contingent on the money that is raised and whether that money kind of comes through at all. So beyond those concerns, our written submission details a number of outstanding items, more technical and more legal in the bylaw and the strategy that relate to interpretation and application, and that we really want to continue working on with staff to resolve. We've had some good discussions over the past couple of months on these. There still are some outstanding items. The project list, it took several iterations to go through, which is why you're seeing this, now at this sort of last PC planning committee before the term, because it just wouldn't kind of come into shape. And there are so many questions around the project list, and some things about the strategy that we still have issue with. So, you know what, maybe I'll just leave it there right now, and I'm happy to take questions as well. And I'll happily answer Councilor Leaper's question about the projections or profits either way, as per his questions.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Councilor Leaper, you're up first.
Yeah, so since we have you, and I think it does tie in. I mean, we are interested in seeing more housing built in the city. We know we need to do a better job of building subsidized housing and social housing and housing that's deeply affordable. But we also need more housing supply as well to bring affordability to a larger market. I think we're seeing some projects that are just not going to move ahead in the coming months. What is going on out there, particularly with respect to purpose-built rental?
So you're certainly right. Projects are being slowed down. You've probably heard anecdotally as much as myself that some projects are being pushed back, others are being shelved completely. I'll relate, of course, some other members have told me that they'll just avoid projects that would fall under the subject of a CBC charge to begin with. So you could conceivably have sort of, under development, if I can use that turn of phrase, from what the zoning may eventually allow. Certainly slow down. I have to admit, I don't have particulars about purpose rental. What I will say is certainly there's been a big push on for-purpose rental over the past number of years, but we don't really see that moving forward. But sales overall for residential construction have really dropped over the past since really about February. I think that has a lot to do, obviously, with the interest rates, a lot to do with consumer confidence as well. And it's not just a slight decline. Like year over year in June and July, sales have dropped 64%. So instead of over 200, overselling 200 homes, say in July, we sold less than 100. I think the number was 89. So there's been a significant drop off of housing sales, I should say, over this past 6 months, to the point where year to date, we're 10% behind the sales that we had last year. So I think, when you split up construction activity in terms of actual starts, I think by the end of this year, starts will still look very healthy. We hopefully will crest to that 9,400 number that we had last year. But moving into the following year, if the sales trends stay like this, as they are, say, quite depressed right now, we're not going to achieve that number come into 2023 for starts and actual kind of construction moving forward. So there's a big concern that, and again, I think that's a lot to do with consumer confidence and the drumbeat of a recession that you're hearing more and more of in the next little bit. So that's making banks and lenders more skittish about lending to projects. So I think you're going to see that overall slowdown come into even into Ottawa come into the next year. So I'll just try to wrap up my. We also talked about population projections in part of the annual development report discussion that was earlier today as well. And that number of 1.5 million into the province over the next 10 years. Roughly in translating for Ottawa, that's supposed to mean somewhere between 10 and 15,000 starts every year in Ottawa for the next decade in order for us to kind of do our share. That number has been verified by a couple of different housing economists. Most recently, Mike Moffat had a report a couple of weeks ago that said we needed over 10,000 a year. And it's certainly, it doesn't seem like we'll do over 10,000 next year based on the sales that we have so far.
Yeah. One of the issues we have, so, the builders have suggested that things like increased CBCs cash in the, we're taking what we can on that, is going to further add to affordability issues. But I wonder if sales are depressed, will we not see a price correction in the market, which is how it's supposed to work?
I think especially, with related to CBC, the issue being you have to do pre-sales, of a certain percentage, usually it's about 60 or 70% or so for a building of that size. So you're just going to see those projects being, shelved and people sitting and waiting for more consumers to kind of come back into the market. Because right now with the higher interest rates, it's not killing demand. It's just telling everyone is kind of, people who need to move into a new home still need to do so. It's just preventing them from doing so. So your pent up demand only just builds in a financial situation such as we have. So what you'll see more likely is just projects waiting for the opportune time that the market kind of comes back, and those kinds of projects, which need significant amounts of, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars to build, a scale of that, buildings that scale. They're just going to have to sit and wait for the market to kind of be in a better position.
There seems to be some agreement that we can, it's worth exploring whether we can get things moving again if the feds were to add a couple more points onto, say, the affordable housing program for the rental market. If it's purpose-built rentals that are going to go on pause because of interest rates and labor challenges, et cetera, and builders can't make their numbers work for their lenders, it strikes me that there is an important role for the CMHC taking its pound of flesh, of course, in terms of more affordable units and ensuring a certain level of affordability at the MR or slightly less.
Sure. Well, I will add, CMHC constantly, and actually just did a recent consultation on why don't more people take up the funding that they do offer, because they do leave money on the table for such things, and it's some shy away from it just from the sheer amount of red tape and other things that you have to do to kind of get that. The reality is if a project is supplemented by CMHC funds to the tune of $300,000 a unit, that's not a sustainable business practice either. If the only way you can build a building is getting such a subsidy from CMHC, it's clearly not the right market.
Okay. Thanks for answering some of those questions we had you here. So with respect to the CBC itself, I hope you're not suggesting that while the totality of the list of eligible projects is something like 700 million, or 800 million, we're gonna collect 7 point whatever. I hope you're not suggesting that if we pass this CBC today, we're authorizing a capital spending program on the ratepayers' back of hundreds of millions of dollars.
No, not at all. I just want to make sure everyone is clear on that. The vast majority of this, again, 338 million of the 500 million that's spending is taxpayer based for benefit to existing and replacement and what have you.
Right.
And that's the vast majority of funds for the projects that are listed within Table 7 are being paid for that way, not really CBC, what people are going to consider development charges through the CBC portion. I just want to make that perfectly clear.
I'm just worried that residents may consider that if we pass this CBC today, that we're authorizing some new multi-$100 million. Those are projects that, if they're not funded by the new CBC, are not going to move ahead, unless council decides, what, we're going to collect those in taxes. But that's not a decision that we're making anytime in the near future.
I would agree. I'm just trying to clarify it from the other side of, don't think just because you're passing the CBC, you're going to get this list of goodies all on developer charges.
We're on the same page.
Yes.
Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Curry.
Thank you. Jason, I want you to know that I'm highly sympathetic to what you're saying. The challenge I have, because I hear, we've added on so many things all at once. It's just nonstop, these additional charges. But the challenge we have, you must be able to see the challenge we have, that what we would provide with community benefits are things that are are helpful to people in terms of keeping them healthy and having them love where they live. And they're all very, really important things. If we didn't do it this way, where would we get the money to do all of these things? Like, do you have some other idea? Or if we didn't add it here, get this money here, where would we get that money from when we really want to have that in every neighborhood, all the benefits?
Well, I mean, substantially, your community benefits should come from the community. And, for the most part, there's a lot of charges, especially on this list within the CBC, that don't have either don't have any benefit to existing, or zero benefit or very little benefit to existing in terms of its allocation. So, I mean, reality is the community benefits, be they parks or infrastructure or what have you, should be borne by the community, not just solely by new development. So, there's every one of these items we could kind of pick apart and see, how things will go. And as they get approved, we probably certainly will have to have those discussions, or certainly at least the proponent and staff will have discussions about what proportion goes where. But the reality is, and as I know you guys are sympathetic to, is we're really kind of getting to the point where, again, the amount of cost in the cumulative, when you look at it in the aggregate, is starting to impede the development. If you include all the things that I listed before, and including inclusionary zoning when we consider it in the next term of council, we've crept over $100,000 per unit for those, again, those apartments that are supposed to be next to transit. That's a significant amount of cost that the city is imposing on those new home buyers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I understand that. And I guess this is our only opportunity. I feel, how do you go back to the community afterwards and say, oh, guess what? All of you have to pay for this now. Really, the only way is through increase in property taxes. And then do we want to do that? I mean, it's, and if we don't have enough housing, then how good is that for people's health? It's all this is not a simple conversation. I get that.
No, certainly not.
It's just that it's hard to see where else other than property taxes. Anyway, I'll wait to see what Catherine has to say and Miranda after that.
Thank you.
Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Jason. I think you've outlined some fair challenges that this committee has to consider. But I'm just wondering, like, it's the province that's making us do away with Section 37. I understand you're looking for us to reject what's in front of us, but do you have any suggestions on what would make the CBC better?
So there's a number of changes and tweaks, modifications, whatever you want to call it, within our written submission on the bylaw itself, and a number of sort of overarching concerns we have about what's included or potentially included on the project list that would help this situation, help reduce what the overall project list would be in there, hence for the title or the impact on per unit cost. Like the city's staff and us are a bit far, and we have different estimates of what the impact will be on a per unit basis, but it's not that far off. Cities is like something like $1,800 a unit, and ours is like $2,700. So somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 a unit for the cost of the CBC, is going to be put onto these new homes. So that's again, money that for these types of items, some of which we would argue should have been in DCs in the first place, and if they were so essential, why weren't they included in the DC background study? But again, that's yet another conversation, which we'll have in 16 months or maybe even less than that when we do the DC bylaw review in the next term of council as well. I'm sorry, I lost where I was going with answering your question.
I was asking if you had suggestions, but you're saying some of the stuff that's included in the project list, it shouldn't be there.
Yeah, that's certainly the big one. There's also just a lot of vagueness in terms of just why titles and not specific projects, like we would see in a DC background study, when it's very specific items, itemized or itemized out by the dollar, as per Councillor Fleury's motion, right? There's just sort of whole lines of whatever it is, $1 million or whatever, and without any specificity about what it is or who it's going to benefit.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no more questions, Thank you, Jason, for your presentation today. We
Sure.
will now go to Miranda Gray for her presentation, and I'll hand the chair over to Councillor Moffatt.
Don't go too far because I don't think it'll be very long. My feeling with this, backed up by Jason's comments, is that it's not ready yet. That there's still significant work to be done on this. My feeling is partially when it came up in the cycle of other things going on at City Hall, that it hasn't baked long enough. So I would suggest that this needs more time to get it right. Because as Jason ended up saying there in his answer to Catherine, when you don't get it right, it lasts for years. And then later on, you have to argue why you didn't fund these things with development charges. So let's take the time and get it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Any questions for our delegation? Seeing none. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for waiting and coming back after so many hours. I don't know that we have another delegation. No, that's it for delegations. So questions to staff on this. Councillor Curry.
I'm just wondering what staff would like to say. You know, they listened to Jason's presentation there as well and Miranda's, and just wondering if staff have a comment. We didn't get the presentation because we've seen it, but any comment maybe from Charmaine?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, we didn't bring on Section 37 leaving. This was brought on by provincial legislation, and now we are with the CBC. If the council chooses not to have CBC, we will collect no Section 37 or CBC. The project list, which I know is under a lot of scrutiny, is an example. It's an illustrative example of projects list that if we met, that was part of the legislation, we had to have a strategy. In the strategy, we had to have the project list. In the project list, it lists projects that we had already cost out. So when you're looking behind, if we had to look at projects that are already on the books and costed out, going forward, it will be a different matter. Going forward, as an application comes in, we'll look and say what projects are available, cost them out, and then put them on the list and start having a master list. And that master list, when a project comes up, we look, there's a project in your ward, we'll say, okay, does it hit the list? Yes, there's one, and they're already prioritized. No, there isn't one, and so then we would be putting it on the list. Once a year during the budget process, we'll look at the list, prioritize it. It will be a public, as the public will have their input on the prioritization of the list as well. So I think that the work has been done. We have the strategy, we have the policy, and we have the bylaw to be implemented as of September 19th, if this is approved.
Okay, and just to follow up there, and what did you think about what Jason was saying about how much it might slow down development?
Yes, there has been additional charges. The CBC is very modest. It's a very modest charge. It does replace Section 37. There will be funds available for other wards that Section 37 was never triggered. So it will be throughout the city. And so there will be funds anytime we're out in the community. The communities want things that will affect their community. They want it in their wards. When development happens, any meeting that I've ever attended, as the councillors have, they're always looking for community amenities that happen within the community close to the projects. So will this slow down housing? It's a very small, modest funding tool that we put into place. We do have a transition that any of the in-stream applications that are right now before us. So when they did all their financing, they didn't include CBC. They are exempt by CBC. If they do not pull the building permit within 5 years, then it would be triggered.
Very helpful. Thanks a lot, Charmaine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Judas.
Yes, actually, Charmaine, you're probably the perfect person to answer this. I'm just, there was a comment by one of the delegations about, this isn't ready for prime time. We should hold off. What happens if we don't? Like, I'm understanding that this is a switch from Section 37. This is provincially required, regulated, expected? So what happens if there's a delay in us passing this? And my other question part to that is, if we do pass this, as you said, we go forward on September 19th, can it be tweaked in, if we find that it's not exactly working the way we wanted it to?
Thank you, Chair. So I will go to the your last point. We will be looking at, this will be another take a look at when we go through the DC. So this will only be for the next 18 months because the DC, as was mentioned, May 2024, we have to revisit the DC. And so at the same time, we're going to look at the CBC, lessons learned, tweak it, and the DC at the same time. It is a new legislation. We're learning as we go, as all of the other municipalities are as well. And so it will be tweaked. And I really say that the next 18 months is a learning opportunity for us. So this isn't something that we're have for the next 5 years or 10 years. Every 5 years, it has to be looked at. We are taking the stance at the same time as the DC is looked at. We will be looking at the CBC.
And when this was being worked on, I understand it's a consultant that looked at this and it came to this report, you engaged, I'm assuming, with the various stakeholders, including the development community, received their feedback and managed to incorporate that to some extent into this report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we had different stakeholders. The industry was one, FCA, residents, councillors, many different stakeholders, the affordable housing group as well. As we took all of the feedback, of course, we didn't necessarily take everyone's feedback into account, but the strategies and all of the policy and the bylaw was based on a balancing of the feedback that we received.
Okay, and then my only other question is, and maybe this is, and Charmaine, feel free to hand this off if you need to. Once again, we're looking at this. We're looking at cash and lieu of parkland. We've just approved the high efficiency standards. I forget the full acronym, but it was a fulsome one. But once again, all of these things, it's adding to the cost of developments. Once again, all of these things are amazing and very helpful and impactful in a beneficial way for not only the municipality, but in large ways the environment and different aspects we're trying to accomplish. But are you finding that maybe this is getting to be a bit much for the development community? I am still concerned. I'm growing concerned about how this will impact buyers and if they can afford these houses, or as this will get, transferred on to buyers as they're purchasing homes, properties, even renting.
Thank you, Chair. As mentioned, this is a modest of all of the funding tools. This is the most modest one. I am going to pass it over to Mr. Wise for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the costs that are associated with this, we have been looking at this in terms of the panoply of costs that would be attributed to a development and how the impact of this. And I do concur with my colleague Charmaine. The impact on community benefits charge is a small percentage of the total cost in development. When you equate that with inclusionary zoning is much more significant. We are talking about something that might be impacting 4% of the project cost. With community benefits charge, it is more in the range of 0.2 to 0.5% of a project cost. So yes, it is an incremental cost on development, but in terms of the overall panoply of charges that a development does have to achieve, this is not in the same ballpark as, say, development charges.
And that's helpful. And as I said, I mean, in individual circumstances, these things that we're approving are benefiting the community. They're going to benefit the municipality. I'm just concerned that as we go through with each and every one of this, it keeps adding that death by 1,000 cuts, right? And then eventually buyers like my 23-year-old stepdaughter can't afford a home in our city. So I do think this is beneficial. I do have one last question. I'm curious, in terms of the motion that is before us, what is staff's opinion of that? Does that change the dynamics of the report and what's being proposed? I'm just curious as to your thoughts on it.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Perfect. That's it for me, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Chair Moffat. My question, following up on what was just asked here, I think Mr. Wise said that all these things that we're adding together here don't add up to the same as development charges. I thought on an average unit being built, development charges were around 45,000, yet we're hearing the accumulation of all these new charges that are coming out of mainly the work in your area are adding up to almost $100,000. So wouldn't that be on a bigger impact to housing? Because we're not taking away those 40,000, so we're still asking for the 40,000, but now the accumulated number we're hearing is 100,000. Can I get some clarification on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to clarify what I said there with respect to that, we're talking about the broad gamut of ranges. There are a whole number of charges that a development does have to absorb. There's, of course, the development application fees that we charge, the rezoning, official plan, all of those things like that. Cash in lieu of parkland that this committee looked at a few weeks ago. The high performance development standards that have also been put in place. Development charges that also include in there. And when you add up all of those things together, that has a per unit door charge. But when you look at that in terms of the context of how much that costs for a project writ large, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. So if you looked at, say, a 200 unit development.
No, Mr. Wise, please, let's keep it to a single unit because I want taxpayers to know how much we're adding to the price of their next home with all these different things that we're adding on really in the last 12 to 18 months.
Well, I don't have the numbers for a single unit with respect to the community benefits charge. I have that on a per building basis because a community benefits charge is charged on a per building basis. I appreciate what you're asking though, is what is the total cost, but the quantum of the charge for community benefits charge is much smaller than what we charge for the development charges, or what would be the charge for inclusionary zoning, as an example. They're different scales.
Fair enough on the community benefit charge, but when we add them all together, which is what was just getting discussed there, the high performance standards, all the other things that we've approved, have we not put the cost per building or per house up to 100,000?
I don't know about that exact number, Mr. Chair. We'd have to go back and look at that. Certainly, the increase in development charges that happen in order to part of the flow through for paying for the infrastructure requirements that support growth. Those are the things that do have some of that larger impact on it. It's true that high performance development standards, inclusionary zoning, cash in lieu of parkland, CBC do have an impact as well. Again, of those two, it's development charges and inclusionary zoning that tend to have the larger quantums.
Okay, a final question to you. Don't you think that's an important number that we should be looking at? Not just council, but also staff? Shouldn't we be tracking how much we are adding on to a unit here? Given that, as Councilor Menard said earlier, we're in a housing crisis here. So why are we making it so expensive that when we designate transit-oriented development, for example, why, when we add up all these programs, we're now hearing that nobody's going to want to build in the transit area, which means that has all kinds of implications for us too. So I just think I'm happy to leave it there. I think we need to be tracking that. I think every time we come forward with new charge, I'd like to get a sense of what's the impact per unit. You can define what the unit is that you're tracking it, because that's what we rely on staff to do, whether it's an individual house or how you work it. But we need something that our residents and taxpayers will understand the impacts of what we're agreeing to do here. You mentioned cash in lieu. We're going to go from what, 5% to 25%, and we don't think that has an impact on a house, the per house cost. I'd like to see us starting to track that. So I'll leave it there, Chair Moffat.
All right, thank you, Councillor Leeper. You had your hand up for a sec, but you're right. So any further questions for staff on this? I don't see any. we gotta be careful when we talk about CBC on here. You know, you get a certain leadership candidate will start to call on the city of Ottawa to defund community benefits charge. So so no other comments, so that's fine. So that's good. We'll get back to, hold on, I gotta pull up my agenda. I'm in and out of chairing here, so I don't always keep these things open. All right, so item 5.13, community benefit charge strategy and bylaw. Report recommendations. Do we have motion? Did I miss anything? Because I wasn't here right at the start. Councillor Fleury, did you have a motion on this? Have you tabled it yet?
Yes, it was introduced, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any questions on Councillor Fleury's motion? No issues? We carry that? Carry? All right, thank you. So then we'll do that as amended here. Report recommendations that Planning Committee recommend Council 1 approve the community benefits charge strategy report, including the prioritization of the capital program list within the report. 2, adopt the community benefits charge bylaw, and 3, approve the community benefits charge policy as contained in document 4. Is that item carried as amended?
Carried.
Carried. Thanks. Then we deferred that, we carried that. In-camera items, none. Item pre-distributed. You'll get the Cash in the Parkland report. Notice of motion. I believe Councillor Dudas has a notice of motion.
I do. Let me just pull that up. All right. Whereas in 2014, changes to the zoning bylaw were approved by council to implement official plan amendment 150, resulting in properties along key corridors, including Innis Road and Blackburn Hamlet, being rezoned Innis Road Zoning Review Area Document 1. And whereas these changes introduce arterial Main Street AM11 subzone zoning on properties located along and adjacent to Innis Road, permitting building heights of up to 30 meters in a variety of land uses. Whereas earlier this year, a site plan control application to permit a 9-story building was received for a property within the Innis Road zoning review area that does not front onto Innis Road. Therefore, its side yard rather than rear yard abuts a low-rise residential zone. Whereas the zoning provisions that establish building setbacks in the AM11 subzone are more permissive for side yards, allowing for greater height nearer to adjacent low-rise residential zones. Whereas this application of step backs within the Innis Road zoning review area creates inconsistencies in the way that buildings are massed and scaled in relation to low-rise residential areas, which can result in undesirable impacts on the surrounding community. Therefore, be resolved that staff be directed to investigate amending the zoning bylaw in the next omnibus amendment so that the setbacks within the Innis Road zoning review area, document 1, are applied to both the rear and side yards, where development abuts low-rise residential zones. Properties subject to an active planning application will be exempt from these changes. Be it further resolved that staff be directed to re-examine the appropriateness of the AM11 subzone within the Innis Road zoning review area as part of the new zoning bylaw project, as concerns related to building height and compatibility with the surrounding community remain.
All right, thank you. So that'll be on the agenda for our next planning committee meeting, which will be on Thursday, September 8th. Any inquiry or any other notice of motion? None were circulated, so I just want to check here. None? Any inquiries? None. Other business? None. Adjournments?
Carried.
Carried. I can tell Glenn doesn't come back. All right. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
You.